MTG is typically a family-friendly game, a silly TCG that can be enjoyed by players of all ages. Still, Magic does get into the macabre and dastardly from time to time, and their big baddies at times can be downright atrocious. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ether Hub. I'm Simon, bringing you another MTG list video. Today, let's talk Nicol Bolas, one of the most popular villains in Magic, not to mention one of the most dangerous. His plans and schemes go back farther than most of us know, and he's done some really terrible things in his pursuit of his goals. What does he want? Oh, nothing too big. Just the powers of a god, powers he once had before the mending took them from him. As I said, he's done some really awful things in order to become a god once again, and that all culminated in the massive event known as the War of the Spark. If you're remotely familiar with this channel, then you know about the War of the Spark and heard me complain about it ad nauseum for a while. While some may point to this as the worst thing Bolas has ever done, it's certainly debatable with how much crud he's put the player base through. So, let's go ahead and take a look at the top 5, or really the bottom 5 worst things Bolas has ever done outside of the War of the Spark. And warning guys, things are gonna get a little gruesome. Number 5, a bad deal. We all know that Bolas has been a part of so many shady deals, one of the worst ever being the fine print he left on a contract with the necromancer Liliana Vess, which of course is the trademark of a true scumbag. So what am I talking about? Well, it was all a part of Bolas's plan from the start, dating all the way back to the Mending. The Mending caused all the Planeswalkers across the multiverse to essentially get nerfed in power, once they were true gods capable of doing basically anything. And this included Nicol Bolas as well as Liliana Vess. Once that was taken away, however, Bolas started planning his return to godhood. This is the basis for his character, and basically the reason he's done, well, all of this bad stuff. Liliana also would play a role in this grand scheme, eventually coming out as an essential part of his army in the War of the Spark event. So the groundwork were laid all the way back at the dawning of this character to essentially, eventually, force Liliana Vess into Bolas's service as a talented necromancer who would go on to earn a lot more power for herself. Nicol Bolas needed her unique skills to control his undead hordes. And that's where this contract initially came into play. With Liliana Vess losing her pre-mending powers and immortality, she became old and gross, frankly. Liliana was desperate to stay off death. She was willing to do anything. Enter the literal deal with the devil, well, more like dragon, in Nicol Bolas. Bolas acted as a broker between Liliana and 4 demon lords who all agreed to give her eternal youth and boost her necrotic magic in exchange for pieces of her very soul. That deal being signed on her skin. Thus, all the weird, funky tattoos you see on her character design. Liliana went on sort of a rampage during her character's development over the years, getting her revenge on these demon lords and killing them all in order to claim her soul once again. Now with all 4 dead, the latest being Belzenlach on Dominaria, she thought she was free. But again, she really should have read that fine print. Literally, her contract defaulted to the broker of that deal, Nicol Bolas, and it was all there in black, white, purple, and red, however you want to say it. Now Bolas had control over her fate and future. Worse still, it was all part of his plan from the get-go. Giving Liliana something that she wanted, making her strong, only to use her as a tool nearing his endgame. And this just goes to show you never want to make a deal with Bolas. Number 4, Shards of Power. One of Bolas's earliest schemes to regaining his lost godlike powers from the Mending came during the Conflux, the reunification of the separated Shards of Alara into a single plane. You may know the Shards of Alara more so in MTG terminology describing 3 colors, like Nicol Bolas is Grixis, for example, that being the combination of black, red, and blue mana. You also have Bant, Naya, etc. But Alara is more than just shards, and Bolas would manipulate that fact in order to achieve his goals. So at the start, Alara was shattered and split into different shards. These were in fact separate planes. Members of one shard could not venture to another. Each had access to different colors of mana and thus evolved wildly different ideals, societies, and even creatures. Bolas wanted to jam these shards together, reforming Alara, and ultimately pitting the denizens of these different shards against one another in an utterly total magical war that would surely destroy the whole of Alara. The dragon mostly chilled out on Grixis, his preferred shard and a place he spent a lot of his post-mending time. But soon he started venturing out, setting up agents and minions all across the other shards. His influence grew through political puppets and whispers of a coming battle. This pushed many of the shards to the brink of paranoia, nervousness, trigger happy and ready for a fight. And a fight there would be. As Alara reformed, Bolas appeared in the center known as the Conflux and absorbed as much of that chaotic mana as he possibly could. The shards merged into Alara, and suddenly, standing armies had an enemy to fight. The total war consumed the denizens. Not only did this war fuel Bolas even further, but it provided a much needed distraction from the dragon's true goal, the power of the Conflux itself. Luckily, a Johnny Goldmane was able to stop him, but still, Alara is a plane plagued by war and conflict, all because Bolas sought absolute power. Number 3. Fratricide. As we learned in the story of Magic Core Set 2019, the history of Nicol Bolas, the spirit dragon Ugin, was, and well still is, Bolas's twin brother. Hatched from the same egg and both being survivors of the Elder Dragon War, Bolas and Ugin appear to be two sides of the same coin. Only Bolas has grand schemes and Ugin looks to stop them. It's a real Batman and Joker sort of vibe. And we all know what happens when the Batman tries to stop Joker, right? Well, even more specifically, we know what happens to Nicol Bolas's enemies when they try to stop him, relative or not. However, all of this information would have been very lovely to have earlier, as Nicol Bolas, we learn, killed Ugin on the plane of Tarkir. This would have been a much more impactful event at the time if we had all the facts. I mean, we know that Bolas killed Ugin who was looking to stop him, but it would have been a little bit more important if we knew that they were siblings, or twins no less. Anyway, yes, Bolas kills Ugin. It's one of the more devastating moments in the history because of what Ugin had stood up for at that point. It was Ugin's patience, calm, intelligence that seems to be unraveling the schemes. What looked to be our best weapon not only against Bolas, but all multiversal threats. That included the Eldrazi. With Ugin's death, the multiverse was certainly worse off. Now, why did Bolas kill his own twin? Well, to protect his own plans, of course. We found out in the Ixalan block that the Planeswalker Azur had joined forces to end Bolas for good by trapping him on Ixalan. However, this meant first baiting him on Tarkir. But Ugin was never given the chance to signal Azur to pull Bolas onto Ixalan. The trap was never sprung. Ugin was killed in that epic battle, and hope was seemingly lost for years upon years. Yes, we did manage to bring Ugin back thanks to time travel, tipping my cap to you, Mr. Sarkhan Vol, but Bolas is still willing to kill even his twin brother in order to get what he wants. I'm a twin myself, and I sympathize, I get it. We fight sometimes, but this is a low you do not cross. Bolas, take a page out of Vin Diesel's book, and you don't do this to family. Number 2. Busting out the Eldrazi. A long-running mystery in MTG was the initial release of the Eldrazi Titans trapped on the plane of Zendikar. We understood that it was engineered by someone as a number of different planeswalkers and events had been manipulated to have that one desired result, and the evidence became clear as we found Sarkhan Vol was speaking to the maddened whispers of one Nicol Bolas. But still, we never understood why. What part of his grand scheme did releasing these world eaters, these forces of the multiverse no one could control, actually fulfill? Imagine this for a moment. Nicol Bolas understood the nature of the Eldrazi Titans, how they devour worlds scattered randomly throughout the multiverse. His rival Ugin was interested in them as well. There's no clear conclusion on the origins or even the purpose of these beings, if there are any to begin with. maybe they're just timeless, meaningless monsters. The very fact is, we don't know. And there's nothing to suggest that Bolas knows either. In fact, there's not even much information on whether Bolas knew he could defeat them or not. If the Eldrazi just go around eating planes randomly, logically, if they were released with no real plan to handle them, they would eventually leave the multiverse barren of life. And this includes Bolas. That to me is not a very good plan. So what was the reasoning behind this great jailbreak? Simply because he wanted to see how the multiverse would react. More specifically, the heroic Planeswalkers who would undoubtedly band together to face the threat that were the Eldrazi. He wanted to track this supposed group, to test their strength, simply to gauge if they would be a threat to his own plans. And that's literally it. The Eldrazi were nothing more than a test for whatever group may or may not form. Luckily for the multiverse, a group did form, namely the Gatewatch. Even though they defeated the Eldrazi, the way they did so signaled to Bolas that they were no true threat, which to me is just insane. Still, letting loose world-eating entities of the void just to see if people would challenge it, well, that's pretty low. Number 1, the reshaping of Amonkhet. This, guys, is probably the worst thing Bolas has ever done, and yeah, I'm including the War of the Spark. Unless you're talking about the War of the Spark's writing quality, that, if you want to count Bolas as implicit to that, was probably the worst thing he's ever done. But yes, even including the destruction of countless planeswalkers on Ravnica. And yeah, we've seen that he's manipulated planes for his benefit before, but this goes even beyond that. He essentially repurposed the world of Amonkhet to be a factory of sorts, and let's just say the rebuilding process was just as bad as the initial breakdown. As a huge part of his master plan, Bolas looked to Amonkhet as a staging ground to build himself an army. Not just an army though, an army of powerful, skilled undead warriors made of metal. Yes, these were zombie bots. Ageless, 100% devoted to him alone. These were the Eternals. Now, all he had to do was make the natives of Amonkhet and their gods do all this work for him. A little bit easier said than done. So how does Bolas get all of this to happen? Easy. He just erases the entire population of Amonkhet in an instant and starts from scratch. Yep, you heard that right, guys. Bolas came down, found that the gods and practices were close to matching to what he wanted, i.e. the people believed in the gods and performed mummification to preserve the dead. The people also challenged and pushed themselves to physical perfection and championed those skilled in combat. These were the ingredients Bolas was looking for, and now he found that on Amonkhet. Now, they just needed a little push towards obedience. He warped and reprogrammed the gods of Amonkhet, whose brains acted almost like mana ley lines. Bolas, being a master mana manipulator, was able to recircuit their brains, so to speak, into basically being his puppets. Now, when Bolas first appeared, the gods saw him as a threat and fought against him. But of course, a little mind control here, a little blue magic there. He messed with their minds and made them believe that he was in fact the God Pharaoh, the god of gods, all-powerful, all-creating, and all-benevolent. The people of Amonkhet, though, were a little bit more difficult to persuade, simply because they remembered him coming and fighting the gods. So long as there were those able to pass down these stories, Bolas and his plans would be challenged. So he took the easy way out, rather than earning their love, because what? God Dragon has time for that, right? He killed every single adult above an age that could ever remember Bolas's arrival. In a sense, he wiped out the entire plane except for the very, very young and babies, leaving these children alone in the care of the manipulated gods. The gods then promoted Bolas's plan as they believed it to be the will of some great god pharaoh. The children grew up and the society focused on exactly what Bolas wanted. The entire civilization did nothing but train their bodies to pass the trials of the gods, earning the ultimate reward of being killed by the gods, and embalmed for eternity, only to rise again once their great god pharaoh ever returned. And of course, return he did, and rise the Eternals did. But it wasn't some glorious revival. These were mindless slaves for Bolas, skilled in all the combat they had learned in their past lives. His new army. He wasn't done with Amonkhet yet though. He went through and destroyed the world even further, tearing down the final city left for the living, and even going so far as releasing 3 evil gods that he had corrupted even further and left as his ultimate force on Amonkhet. Bolas killed almost all of the other gods, and left only a handful of survivors on Amonkhet to meek out an existence in the desert of sand and undead. Amonkhet, for all intents and purposes, is now gone. Also, Bolas could have an army. And there you guys have it, my picks for the 5 worst things Bolas has ever done in his pursuit of godlike powers in MTG. Bolas has been around for a long time and he's done a lot of shady things. So let me know what some of your worst memories of Nicol Bolas are in the comment section below. This can also include your horror stories of a game encounter with Bolas. He's certainly appeared on a lot of powerful cards throughout MTG's history, and I'm sure some of us have had some pretty bad days facing him down. And remember, if you enjoyed the video guys, consider supporting the channel by subscribing, hitting that bell, and sharing it across the multiverse, aka over on Reddit and other social media sites. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, see ya!